Just give me a high sign when we're ready to go.
Doug, you should have an invitation to join us as a panelist. Oh, here he comes, I hope. There we go. Okay, Mr. Chair, all ready.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will call to order the Board of Equalization training session held on April 25th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. I see, actually, I'll just call a roll so that everyone can identify themselves. Mr. Sonnenberg?
Good evening, everybody.
Mr. Solomon Gross?
Hi, everybody.
Ms. Emily Haynes?
Hello.
Mr. Doug Salak?
Hi, Doug Salick. Thanks.
Salick, okay. Mr. Ben Durant?
Ben Durant, checking in.
Thank you. Mr. Wayne Coogan?
I'm here and I can't figure out the video feature, so I'll just deal with the black screen.
Okay, thank you.
You still look good.
And Chair Epstein.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
We have a quorum is present. The only member we're missing is Mr. Thor Williams.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Does anyone wish to change it?
Mr. Chair, I will make a motion to approve the agenda as written. And I'll second.
Thank you. I believe it was Mr. Solomon Gross who made the motion and Mr. Sonnenberg second to approve the agenda as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing or seeing none, the agenda will stand approved as presented. We can now move on to agenda topics, the first of which is the Office of the State Assessor BOE training. Not sure what the action is here other than we were all supposed to watch last year's training video. Are we obliged to report in whether we did our homework or not?
Thank you, Chair. I will leave it up to the committee if there's not a chance. You have it as a reference, especially for any of you that are new. I highly encourage you if you hadn't had a chance yet, because it will come into play. So, but other than that, no action is needed on that.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is presentation of the City and Borough of Juneau assessment process by the Assessor's Office staff. Ms. Hammond, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Epstein. Greg Morris will be presenting for the Assessor's Office today.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for volunteering. We appreciate your time. It's you're sort of unsung heroes. So, this won't do. I have to have a fun transition. Let me start this over. Share my screen. Okay, so I can't hear you. Or I can't see you, sorry. So I think somebody's job is to scream at me if you have a question, and please feel free to interrupt. But so my name is
Greg, if you're sharing your screen, we can't see it.
You can't. Well, let me try
again. If you
again.
have two monitors, it might be on your second monitor.
Yeah, I thought I just didn't hit share. There we go. Woohoo! Oh, and now I can see you. Okay, excellent. All right. Well, welcome to the 2024 assessment overview. My name is Greg Morris. I'm the commercial appraiser for the assessor's office. I've been with CBJ for 5 years, and in the last few years, I've transitioned into the commercial side of appraising. My goal with this overview is that you understand our process and why we do it. So I'm happy to stop and answer any of your questions. Our job at the assessor's office is to value property at full market value as of January 1 of each year. And what is full and true value, you ask? So according to Alaska statute, it is the estimated price that the property would bring in an open market and under the then prevailing market conditions in a sale between a willing seller and a willing buyer, both conversant with the property and with prevailing general price levels. All appraisers in the assessor's office are trained by the IAAO, that's the International Association of Assessing Officers. So we do their coursework and we follow the guidelines. We consider all three approaches to value and valuing real property for our assessments. The first is the cost approach. So it's what does it cost to build the improvement today, which is the RCN part of that, replacement cost new, but it's not new, so depreciation is considered and land value is added. And that replacement cost new less depreciation term, you'll hear that a lot from us. We rely on it a lot. So the second is a sales approach. It compares sales of like properties and adjustments are made for differences in characteristics. And this is usually what you see on a residential fee appraisal. And then finally, the income approach is specific for commercial properties. And this captures the investor's income expectations of the property. So for most property types, we use the market adjusted cost approach. So first we establish the land value and building replacement cost new less depreciation value, the RCNLD again. Then we comparable sales are grouped by type, location, use. And now we perform ratio studies to determine what adjustments need to be made to bring our cost values up to that full market value. And we call this a market adjustment. Ratio is calculated between the cost model and recent sales prices that are disclosed to our office. Using this method, similar properties within the same neighborhood are uniformly assessed. And comparable sales aren't directly used to value individual properties, but they are used to provide market evidence that the cost approach is supported. And the assessor chooses a method of valuation, typically based on available data. And this is from the Alaska Supreme Court, Fairbanks versus Golden Heart Utilities in 2000. And it says, if the assessor has a reasonable basis for the valuation method, we will approve that method so long as there was no fraud or clear adoption of a fundamentally wrong principle of valuation. The cost approach is by far the most economical for property owners. We don't have enough resources to do individual appraisals on all 12,500 parcels each year. Our cost approach values are adjusted by sales, so we heavily consider sales, and we're typically below those sale prices. We typically don't have enough data to use other approaches. Owners aren't required to provide sale prices to us. Commercial owners aren't required to provide financial information either. Okay, developing the assessed values. So we canvass each property once every 5 years to observe changes. We take pictures, note quality, condition. Did the building grow a new wing, or is there a new deck, or has a deck been removed? Then we update property specifics in our CAMA program, which is the computer-aided mass appraisal program. And make sure we are treating like properties the same. So for instance, a typical or the depreciation of a 1980s townhouse in typical condition should be the same throughout Juneau. So after our canvas cycle, we review sales to determine if we can actually use them in our ratio studies. And we use a standard verification process that follows the IAAO standards. Reasons we can't use sales include a sale between family members or changes to the property after the sale, such as like it was vacant land, now it has a building on it. And once we have our qualified sales, we perform ratio studies on like properties in the same neighborhood to develop the market adjustments and finalize our assessed values. So we do go neighborhood to neighborhood. And for property classes, it's a split between residential and commercial. Residential includes everything, including fourplexes. Commercial is retail, office, medical, hotel, industrial, multifamily. It includes like multifamily is 5+ currently. We consider land characteristics when valuing land. Location has a large impact on value, but we also make adjustments for topography, shape, view, waterfront access, and wetness. And so now I'll walk you through how we develop our assessed values for residential properties. This is an example of a single family residence in Juneau. Let me get my little pointer. Have the power. Okay. So here's our sketch. They all look like this. They're all one-dimensional. So this is our gross living area here. So we have a slab with roof. We have a deck in the rear. And this is our attached garage. And these are all valued independently. So on the BOE level, you'll probably see one of these cost reports come your way. And this boils down to how we get that replacement cost new less depreciation number for the building or for all the improvements. So just step you through this. So this one right here, so we have parcel number, owner name, the address, we have a year built, and this effective year built drives our depreciation. Number 2 over here, we have building type, quality, it's a 3, it's average, construction, stud frame, total living area. 3 is the external specifics, which is what roof, what siding, and it also has heat source here. And then 4 is kind of everything outside of gross living area, which is the garage, wood deck, and that porch. 5 is kind of a question we get a lot of, which is fixture count. So we pick up kitchens and bathrooms this way. So that's how we value if an extra kitchen, we capture all that value. How many bathrooms we have, we capture it in that fixture count. And 6 is the most confusing part, but it's equally important. So these are our multipliers. So for instance, you see here, it says a local multiplier. So we get our cost tables, we get cost information from Marshall and Swift, who's they supply cost information for appraisals, appraisers and and offices throughout the US. So they have, for instance, our local multiplier. They say you're not only in Alaska, but you're in Juneau. And then on the very bottom, you can see our neighborhood adjustment, and that's the adjustment we make from our ratio study. So we compare the sale prices to our assessed values, and so we find to bring up our RCNLD numbers or our cost approach up to that market value, we have to put a multiplier in there to meet that. And in this case, it says 132. That's 32%. So this is a note section you can totally ignore. And 7, these are miscellaneous improvements. They're just nominal value things, like a shed below 2,000 square feet is always valued at a certain value. And then everything is stacked up here for the total improvement value, or the RCNLD value of 3. Oh, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Fixtures.
Yeah.
In this case, a fixture is valued at $1,800. Is that a borough-wide figure, or is that specific to a neighborhood?
That's borough wide. Yeah.
Okay,
So nothing's really manipulated until we get to that neighborhood adjustment. So that would vary neighborhood to neighborhood.
and could you go over all of the multipliers?
Sure. Okay. So condition, average, that would, it'd range from fair to good, very good. So we have that local multiplier. The current multiplier just says, the Marshall and Swift book. Hey, we have this Marshall and Swift book. They don't update all the pages all the time. They just say, okay, everything needs, due to costs, everything needs, in this case, a 0.14 multiplier. Quality adjustment. So that ranges, that's just our quality. So in this case, it's an average up here, a 3. It can range from poor to very good. Then the neighborhood multiplier, I don't know if we ever use the neighborhood multiplier. I don't think we do. Depreciation, physical. So how much physical depreciation does your building have? Functional, that's like if you have a home that only has a living room and no bedrooms, that would have some functional depreciation. Economic is that's what we call an outside force. So people no longer want hot dog stands. So it doesn't matter what we found that in the market, hot dog stands just have this economic depreciation outside of its cost. And percent complete, we adjust that, especially when houses are being built. So we use a calculator that, just so we treat everybody fairly, have the same measuring stick for everybody. It just says how complete is the building. And finally, a cost to cure. That's when somebody comes to us and says, I have this major issue, I have an estimate for that, and until that's done, it lowers the value of my property. And so what we would do is we'd put a cost to cure on there of, say, like $100,000, and then we'd follow up with them every year and say, is it done? Is it done? Is it done?
Question.
Shoot.
Okay, the depreciation physical is
Yeah.
20, that means 20%. So how
Yeah.
is that determined?
So that's a tricky one because we have well, it's not tricky at all. We just have a schedule that we all use in the same way. And we actually, so buildings between, so specifically for residential homes, residences between 1968 and 1975 are this depreciation typically. And then when we see a depreciation that's different from there, we'll jump up a level or jump down a level. So because at the end of the day, because everything is, well, I won't go there, but yeah, that's how we do it.
One final comment on this particular page. Moving forward, I think if in future training sessions, it might be a good idea to redact owner name and
Oh.
address.
Oh, sure. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so moving on. This is the ratio study. So this graph shows an example of a ratio study before time trending. So we see this trend line here is going down. The x-axis here shows a sale month with 0 being January 1 of 21 and 36 being January 1 of 2024. So that's our whole range we're studying. This y-axis is the AS ratio itself. So it's assessed values divided by the sale prices. And so this downward trend line actually shows that the market's increasing over time, because as the market increases, our assessed values are becoming lower than the sale prices. And then so now the impact of time is removed from the sales. So now you see this flat line here. So in other words, after accounting for the potential effects of the sale date, the time in which the property was sold, no longer has any significant impact on explaining or predicting its sales price. So once we control for the timing of the sales, we can now compare all the sales the same regardless of when they were sold. And after the sales have been segmented into neighborhoods, that's when we apply those market adjustments to each neighborhood. So we're studying each neighborhood. Our target is typically 100%. The reason that this line is a little below that 100, so this skipped a couple steps. This is actually a finalized thing. So we are now hitting our target, and it's actually 0.95. Typically we would go 100. And our market adjustment is the median AS ratio for each neighborhood. Medians are less influenced by outliers. That's why we use those. And so here, this goes back to the cost report. I just wanted to highlight where that is again. So you have the neighborhood adjustment or market adjustment, and it's a 132 multiplier, so that's 32%.
So Greg, will we see an assessment where with a neighborhood adjustment that'll be minus 32%?
I've never seen it's possible. I actually put well, in residential, no, I don't believe so. It's typically an increase from the cost. Yeah. And that might just be because the cost tables don't quite accurately reflect what it really costs in Juneau, so that's how we capture that. That's why it all sort of, everything kind of washes out because we are comparing sale prices to assess values, and that's how we make the movement. So if the market does go down, you're going to see that you could see a negative increase. I don't know when that's going to be, but yeah.
So Greg, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Solomon Gross, were you done?
Yeah, I just said thank you.
Okay. All right. So the neighborhood adjustment of 32%, what does that suggest? Does that suggest that this neighborhood is the median assessment in this neighborhood is 32% above something?
So it means that in order to get our median assessed value up to market level, we need to put that 32, we need to increase it by 32%.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just want to be clear on this. So what you're saying is that in order to get the assessed value up, the adjustment you're making is in the neighborhood adjustment. So
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if you are in the Flats or if you're in Lemon Creek, everybody's going to get a 32% neighborhood adjustment.
nope. You'll get a different adjustment for the Flats and a different adjustment for Lemon Creek. So we study each neighborhood of like properties individually. Yeah. And so with that, I'm sure we capture a lot of, so that adjustment is due to location, right? A single family home on Lena Points will, of the exact same home, will have a different value on Lena Point than it will in Lemon Creek. And so each neighborhood adjustment is specific to the neighborhood.
So there's going to be an adjustment for a neighborhood adjustment, and just like a Lena Point home, there's going to be an adjustment for, say, it's a waterfront, or depending upon that, or what the topography is in that house. So there's going to be just a multiple different adjustments, correct?
Yeah, and those finer adjustments for land, we do that on the land value itself. So we'll say waterfront properties get this adjustment on their land. Yeah, so we take all those into account. Yeah. And those are done by a study which we're due to do. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Permission to ask a question?
Shoot.
Go ahead.
Oh, I guess you don't need my permission. Sorry.
Well, I was asking the chairman, can you kindly explain the difference between the neighborhood adjustment and the neighborhood multiplier, which is, in this case, the neighborhood multiplier is 1?
Yeah, I don't think we use the neighborhood multiplier.
Okay.
Am I correct in that, Mary?
The neighborhood multiplier was more cumbersome to try to adjust in the CAMA program. And so we use the neighborhood adjustment instead. So there is no neighborhood multiplier in any of the borough.
So in order to not use it, you just set it at 1, and that's the effect, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay, so moving along to the 2024 residential assessments. We have, that's not exactly Juneau, but you get the point.
Before we
Um,
move on, could I ask a question?
Please do.
Yeah, related to that neighborhood adjustment, if I'm understanding correctly, if say Lena Point area or neighborhood only has 2 sales in the period of time and Lemon Creek has 200 sales, you're not going to have very much information to be basing your adjustment on. Is that correct?
Yeah, and in that case, what we'll do is we'll grow our neighborhood. So we'll and our so our neighborhoods are not quite what you would think of a neighborhood in Juneau. So they're these designated points. Actually, let me up. So these are actually the neighborhoods that we consider to be neighborhoods. So it's probably bigger than what you would think, you know. And the reason for that is we're a town of 30,000 people. We have 12,500 parcels. I don't know how many single family homes we have, but not a ton. So our neighborhoods definitely need to be big enough to have enough data to make confident equations from, you know, or just confident. Yeah. But so when we have a really, really small data set, yeah, we'll just grow our neighborhood. Yep. Did that answer your question?
I'm going to give you a qualified yes. I have some reservations, but let's continue on.
Sure thing. Okay. Okay, so 2024 residential assessments. Hold on to your hats. So 2024 was a lot like 2023, just less of it. Residential inventory is still really low. Costs are still high. Cheap mortgage rates result in the golden handcuffs, which is people are locked into 2 or 3% mortgage rates and they really don't want to move into an 8%. And sale prices have slightly increased in the last year, but they've definitely softened. So we studied sales from 2021 to the end of 2023 for the 2024 adjustment or assessments. And we have about 75% of residential sales in Juneau, makes for a pretty robust valuation model. This translates to high confidence in our assessed values. There's been a large amount of refinancing due to those crazy interest rates we may never see again. And so that means a lot of appraisals. So if we weren't right on the money with what a homeowner would get their appraisal for, they would appeal. We look at every appraisal we get and we take all the information we can from there. So we got a lot of information from that. We had 1,329 qualified sales, and qualified means the sale price is disclosed to us. We went through the verification process, we qualified it, and we utilize that in our studies. 524 of unverified, it just means we don't have enough sales information. Typically, we just don't have the sales price, or there's conflicting information or something like that. And 230 sales that were rejected. These are rejected because they're not non-typical market transactions, so family to family transaction. And again, we use the IAAO standards for that sale qualification process. So this is for residential still. So the median sale price of residential properties are still creeping up, but the pace has certainly slowed. Single family residential show about a 16% increase from 21 to 23. That was about $73,000 for the median sale price, and 22 to 23 shows about an increase of 2 or 9,750. So low inventory. The inventory's tanked. Supply is very low. Demand is very high, and these sales numbers.
Sorry, through the chair, if I may. On that last slide, why were there a number of blanks in the 2023, excuse me?
That's a good question. I'm not sure actually. Oh, no sales. There you go.
Ah,
So
thank you.
and I
Sorry to
mean
interrupt.
that makes sense to me now, because what do we have? We have cabins, we have triplexes and fourplexes. Triplexes and fourplexes. We just don't have a lot of those.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Sure. No problem. So okay, so again, supply's low, demand's high. Another part of this story is, so here you can see 21 single family, 22. So it goes from 257 to 174 to 66. That's a pretty drastic change. But another part of this story is we're no longer required, or homeowners are no longer required to, or sellers are required to give us mandatory disclosure of the sale prices. So now we're getting less sales data. For a macro view of the market, we compared our time trend to the Case-Shiller National Index. And Juneau's, as you can see, it's following the lead of the Case-Shiller Index. So we're just doing the same thing that the rest of the nation's really doing. So there's nowhere to hide. Month 0 to 16 saw the very aggressive increase, and then it softened a bit throughout the sale range. And here's a histogram of our AS ratios for 24. So you can see that the majority of properties are assessed at or below market value, from 90% to 100% of market value, and then they tail off each way. So we're definitely, I guess we're skewed a bit on the back end there. So we're typically below market value. Here's the year-over-year change in assessed value by property type. And so single family residentials changed about 2% from 23 to 24. Something I didn't study the fourplexes, but when you see a big number like this, we just utilize the data that we have. So it doesn't necessarily mean, it means to us that's the change we need to make, but it doesn't mean that that's exactly what the market did. It's just where we have new sales, so that will always change that number. And this is a year-over-year change by neighborhood. And so we study sales for each neighborhood, and we limit our range to 3 years for residential. So new sales are always being discovered, old sales are always dropping off the end. So there's always going to be an inevitable change from year to year and neighborhood to neighborhood. And the one kind of thing, the one that really sticks out here is this Pedersen Hill, but it's deceiving because it's being developed. There's also only 44 properties in it, so every time a piece of vacant land goes and has a building put on it, it skews that number significantly. And finally, condominiums, both residential and commercial are valued by the sales comparison approach. So what they sell for is what they're valued at. We do time trend sales to January 1, 2024 for the study. And if there's no direct sales in the condo association, a general market trend is applied. Okay, let's get on to the 2024 commercial assessments. So we did perform ratio studies on all major commercial buildings. Warehouse and office buildings received adjustments this year. There was no overall change for 2024. Warehouse received a 5% on average change. Some that were significantly out of equity will see a larger change of value. I canvassed each warehouse this last year, updated building specifics, and studied the sales. The assessments they're now much more uniform. So now we're treating people the same, using the same measuring stick. We've got a really small sales data set, but I really went to great lengths to try to include as much as I possibly could. And I also considered the income approach. So I reconciled my values to the income approach to make sure that they made sense and they tracked the market. And so let's see. So all studies go through that sale validation process, and you can see how over here in the remove from study block, what those reasons are. And there's a new building after a sale, improvement since sale, related party. And these are the main steps of the ratio study for warehouses. So first we review this initial AS ratio without any adjustment for time. Then here you can see that, so this trend line is going up. Here you can see the trend line's flattened, and so that the trend line is now flattened, and and the time in which the property was sold no longer has significant impact on explaining or predicting its sales price. So once we control for this timing, now we can compare them similarly, compare apples to apples, regardless of when they were sold. And finally, this final AS ratio here. So we figure out what our target is, and we derive a market adjustment and apply it for assessed values for our target. And that way, so all the warehouses are adjusted uniformly. And again, in a more perfect world, we'd have thousands of data points, but we don't. I use known sources, surveys, and national statistics, income approach. I just kind of do everything I possibly can with the limited data that I have. And office buildings received a 6.3 negative adjustment. And we did the same thing, performed a ratio study, just like the warehouse properties. They're in a really unique position among commercial property types. I'm going to do a special study this next year. It's a big feat. I don't know anybody else in Alaska who's done it. So it's as far as in assessor offices. So we'll see how it goes. But office buildings, they're really not economically feasible to build anymore for investors. And although vacancy is actually quite low, the operating expenses are kind of beating out rents. And so, yeah, next year, this will be my focus. And again, here's the sales that I had, and these are the ones that were removed. And so it's, again, just improvement after sale is a conversion. And that one's vacant parcel under construction. You can't compare vacant to non-vacant. Okay. Now to appeal time. Okay, so 2023 appeals, it was a normalish year for us. We had 400 appeals total, 309 result in some change. So it's typical during the review process to make some kind of change. They're typically small changes, such as adjustments because we found out that they didn't follow the original plans that we had, or the exterior doesn't match the interior. We now have photos of the interior, or a deck that we couldn't see in the back had been removed. We didn't know it. There was no building permit taken out, stuff like that. And 91% resulted in no change to value. On the BOE level, so BOE saw 2.75% of the appeals last year. One appellant estimate of value was upheld. 3 assessors recommended values were upheld, and 7 resulted in a no change. And so to 2024, we've had very very low appeal numbers. I think that most taxpayers have read and just been inundated about all the articles about housing in America and Juneau, and really same with the commercial market. They've refinanced, it kind of goes on and on. So we've had a total of 158 appeals this year versus 423. It's the lightest appeal season I've seen so far. And we have about 4 appellants requesting BOE so far.
Greg, could I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
What is the difference between 3 assessors recommended value upheld and no change 7?
I thought you were going to ask about the cat. So last year an appellant had an idea of what his value was. We stuck with our value and the BOE sided on the owner's estimate. And then the 3 assessors recommended values, we stuck with our values. These are our recommended values. There, we might have even had a change in there, a recommended change, but you sided with our value versus the appellants.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. So when working with appellants on an appeal review before it gets to the BOE, we first ask appellants for any evidence they would like to share, and we review all the specifics of our property. So everything that you saw in that cost report, is your gross living area accurate? Do you have insulation in your garage, or is your garage finished? So does it have drywall and lighting? Yeah, siding type, heat source, that kind of stuff. And we aren't always accurate with that. It turns out people don't always stick with the plans, and we usually don't have interior photos. So it's just a good way for taxpayers to or property owners to make sure we're valuing accurately. And uniformity is paramount. So we want to be treating everybody the same. It doesn't matter who you are or where you what part of town you live. That same building should be treated everywhere the same everywhere. So same measuring stick for everybody. We're using the same cost model for everybody. So there should be no variance there. Most taxpayers just they really don't realize that we physically canvass the property and take all the specifics into account. So really, once we run down the sales that we have in the neighborhood and double check our specifics and make sure everything jives, and it's usually a easygoing open shut case. And so helpful evidence that we can actually use include appraisals, sale prices, pictures, financial data for commercial properties and comparable properties. We cannot use anecdotal evidence. If we find no problem with our data and no evidence is submitted for us to make a change, we stick with the assessed value. So the burden of proof rests with the appellant. It's of course up to us to do our due diligence and to check that our data for accuracy, but we have years of market data and studies to reconcile our assessed values, and we need actual evidence from the appellant to make necessary changes. And it's not a negotiation, it's a review of the property specifics for the appellant, and for the appellant to provide information. And it's the Assembly's job to determine tax burden and establish exemptions. Our job in the assessor's office is to value property at full market value, regardless of who owns it or their intentions. And so giving a break to one property owner is inequitable for the rest of the community and just shifts that tax burden from one owner to another. And finally, fee appraisals. So they're very helpful, and we read through each one that we receive, and we also utilize the data from that. Their estimates of value and come in all shapes and sizes. Appraisals vary widely depending on why the appraisal was done. So for instance, if it was a refinance appraisal, typically it's going to be more conservative than an appraisal that a potential home buyer is getting. The lender's the client for the refinance appraisal, and appraisals from quote unquote tax specialists can often omit facts that are important to consider or fail to reconcile the final value that they even come up with or the adjustments that they make.
Greg,
Yes.
this is an important slide that we may get challenged this year by some appellants saying, my assessment, I had a fee appraisal done and that should be my assessment. And number one, that's treating, if, you know, it would be treating that appellant out of equity if we accepted their appraisal as an assessment, and anyone else in the neighborhood who had an appraisal that would work out in their favor, we'd have to do the same for them. But more fundamentally, appraisals, fee appraisals are different than assessments in the way that we do assessments here. It's mass appraisal, so we're looking at a population of properties, and a fee appraisal looks at one property and it does consider comps, and the comps may or may not be in that property's neighborhood. So it's an apple and an orange. But as you say, they are of value, and you do review them. And if the information is helpful, you use it. But I do not believe if we're told I have a fee appraisal and I want you to change my assessment to that value, we should not do that out of hand.
Fee appraisals are interesting. Usually when we get a fee appraisal, one of the arguments is time adjustment. So they say, I got a fee appraisal in 2022, it's 23, it should be this value, and the market is always moving. Fee appraisers time adjust too. It is standard, it's completely necessary. So I think that's probably one of the most common arguments. And the other one is it just like coming to matching that exact dollar. We just don't match appraisals. We don't do it. We look at our own model and say, why is there a difference here? And really, typically, if there is a big difference, there's a sore thumb sticking out somewhere, and it's pretty darn easy to spot. So I actually have kind of less trouble with them. If you take away the time trending, we're usually pretty darn close with standard fee appraisals. But I wish I could do a study. I really want to do a study on appraisals provided for buyers versus appraisals provided for lenders, because there is a gap there, and it's just essentially every single time they come in conservative for the lenders and come
And
much closer.
And again, the mass appraisal method takes those discrepancies off the table.
Yeah, it's just uniform.
Mr. Chair, I just want to let you know, since the screen is being shared and you may not be able to see the virtual hands raised, Mr. Coogan has his hand up.
And Mr. Coogan, yeah, feel free to speak up. And this is going to be like an informal session, so feel free just to speak up, and you don't have to ask through the chair. Go ahead,
Okay,
Mr. Coogan.
thank you. Okay, going back to let's see the gentleman's name, who's Greg. Yeah. So you've mentioned several times now about time adjustments. Okay, and I want to make sure I understand what the definition of that is. I'm at this point in time, I'm assuming that if you have a sale during a given year, the time it happens during the year matters. And so you talk about making adjustments for the time value, the times, Am I on the right track, or can you correct me?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so we study sales throughout the year, and the market's always moving. And so when you get an appraisal at the beginning of the year, and you have an increasing or decreasing market, it's definitely, so we're valuing properties as of January 1 of 24 this year, so essentially at the very end of the year. So we're looking at over 1 year, all of 23. So yeah, that appraisal you got on January 1st of 2023, the market has shifted a lot since the end of the year there, since December of 2023. And so we need to apply that adjustment. And yeah, everybody does it. The fee appraisers do it. It's the only way that you can compare sales there, by taking that time element out of it.
Okay, all right. So to translate to my perspective, let's say that I would call it adjusting something that's already been adjusted, but you're adjusting it, you're fine tuning it for a short-term adjustment for a short-term time fluctuation. Does that sound right? Because anything less than a year is considered short-term, right, in finance. So like you're adjusting for the variation that occurs during the 12-month period that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. We're adjusting
Right.
for that variation. And this year, it didn't change that much, right? It was from last year to this year for single family residentials, we saw that 2% increase, median 2% increase. Not much of an adjustment there. But the year before, was it the year before or the year before that? 21, I guess. Yeah, when we saw that huge increase in value, where one of the popular terms that was thrown around was that your home made more money than you did if you had a median income job. That's just such a there's such a big trend there. So that you'd see that year you'd see a huge difference. This year you'd see less.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so that's all. Yeah. Does anybody yeah, thanks. I really appreciate your time, and I'm glad that my hope with this was that you were going to ask questions and that you can have some idea of what we do. And is there anything you want to go back on or re-review or just talk about?
Greg, thank you. I think you were pretty clear. Appreciate your slides.
Great.
Really helped a lot, and good questions during the comment period here, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Appreciate your counsel.
Thank you all.
I have a follow-up if you don't mind.
By all means.
Would it be considered inappropriate for us to call Mr. Morris at any given time just for academic purposes to try and clarify topics?
Emily, you get that one. Miss Wright.
I knew you were going to say that. So I think that once we've entered into the appeal process timeframe, that any clarification has to take place during the meetings. Once we are done with appeals, if things have come up and you want a more academic conversation, you certainly could reach out. But since we're in the appeal process, we need to stay in the public forum.
Oh, okay. So we are in the appeal process right now as we talk.
Right. Today would be the start of that. Yep.
Right. Fine. Thank
So,
you.
Mr. Coogan, I think the way that I could explain it best for the years I've been on here, that our attorneys have really helped us, that any questions that we have, we really want the public to hear what our questions are. So it's really good that we do this out in the public and not in any kind of silo. So it is pretty open for everyone to hear our thoughts and comments.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, if there's nothing more on the assessment process, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the BOE hearing process. And Ms. Wright, are you going to lead the discussion on this?
I think I am. Okay, so let's see if I might not be able to do as well as Greg and share my screen. We'll see. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. There should be two documents. So let me just start out. I know many of you from last year and other city functions, but my name is Emily Wright. I am an assistant municipal attorney here with the Department of Law. So you'll actually hear reference to three different attorneys. I'm assigned to the Board of Equalization. I'm your attorney. You'll also hear Sherry Lane. So she's going to be helping cover if I'm not here or if something comes up. She's kind of a floater this year. And then the assessor's office has Nicole Lynch assigned to them. So there's attorneys assigned everywhere to try and help with the process. But I, for the most part, will be at every meeting with you. And I put together two documents. The quick reference guide, I just want to walk you through, just point it to you. It's a little bit more dense. This quick reference guide gives you every CBJ code reference for the different pieces of what you do. And I put it together last year. I think that it's really useful when you're trying to go and if you're trying to find the code language. It's helpful for me. I always have the code open during your hearings and I'm tracking where we are if there's questions about the code. So I really like that document to give you some of the language and to give you the code references if you want them. So this other document that I put together, and I just sent it out to you because I realized as I was doing it, it might be useful for you guys. This talks a little bit more about the hearing process. So let me start by saying, if you haven't watched the state assessor's presentation, it's so good. And Greg did an awesome job tonight. It's just a really good setup for what you're doing, why we're doing it, and what the process is. Basically, you are hearing appeals from homeowners, commercial property owners, and you're looking at that, whether there was an error in valuation made by the assessor's office. And if you've sat in on any of the previous hearings, Mr. Epstein does a really nice job repeating repeatedly the standard and what the question is. The question is the assessment unequal, excessive, improper, or undervalued? I think the first day we get one where somebody's saying that their property is undervalued, we will all fall over in our chairs. So usually you're looking at an unequal, excessive, or improper assessment. So I went back and I wanted to kind of put together what's the process of the hearing for you. I went back and listened to a hearing from last year. And if any of the new people, if you want to have a hearing to listen to just to see how it looks, I'm happy to pull that from our YouTube and send it to you. But basically, there's 14 steps. It's a lot, but it's not really a lot. You're going to call the case, introduce the board members, go over the rules and procedures, and then you hear from the appellant. The appellants will go first because it's their burden. They'll start out, then the assessor will come in and give their presentation. Usually appellants are nervous and they talk very quickly, and so they will have time to present rebuttal. So they go again because it's their burden, so they get the last word. Then whoever your presenting officer is will say, now it's time to ask questions. Now it's time to have board discussion. And that's when you can ask questions to both the appellant and the assessors. There's a back and forth that the presiding officer will allow to have happen. And what I want to talk about is the fact that those comments and questions become extremely important when we look at the voting. So 2 years ago, last year was the first year. 2 years ago, the code changed to change how we vote on the Board of Equalization. It used to be that you would have to make an affirmative motion if you wanted to deny the appeal. Now you don't have to do anything to deny the appeal. So, for example, you go through the whole process and you say, "Yep, I think it's staying put." The presiding officer asks, "Are there any motions?" And it's dead silent. And it's silent for a good 30 seconds, and we say, "Okay, there's no motions. This is deemed denied." So you don't have to make an affirmative motion to deny something. You just don't make a motion to grant it. The reason, to go back to your discussion and questions, the reason that's important is because one of my primary jobs is to defend your decision in court. And what we do is we look at what questions did you have? What was the focus of your inquiry? What was the discussion when you said, you know, I've asked all these questions and now I'm really concerned. I don't see that this is unequal, or I do see it's unequal. That conversation is the complete focus of any appeal. What are you thinking and why did you do what you did? So I want to encourage you to have a robust conversation because the worst case scenario for me, if something was appealed, is that nobody said anything and nobody made any motions and it's just silent. So really having those conversations. And I think also, if you go back to what Greg said, and then also what the state assessor's presentation, a large part of this process is making sure that people feel heard, that you are understanding them, that you're interacting with them. They can not love a decision that you've made, but still be okay with it if they understand why you're doing it. So I just really want to encourage you to do that. If you do want to make a change, then that's where you make a motion, and you need 2 people to vote with you for that motion to go. And as Greg pointed out, there were scenarios like that last year. So the last thing I want to just talk to you about is what's my job and things you need to be aware of. I will help you with process. I will help you with code questions. And again, I defend your decisions to the Superior Court. We have there were no appeals to the court last year. We have 1 appeal that's still pending from 2022. So that one's there. And then the final things to be aware of, I realize that there's a little bit of a typo. I said here, don't communicate with your fellow board members outside of the hearing. What I mean is, don't communicate about cases. You can talk to each other. Although you are on a board, and so if you're all at Fred Meyer's, if there are 3 of you and somebody walks up, somebody's got to leave. So you got to watch your numbers, never have more than 3 of you talking at Fred Meyer. But really what it is you can't be communicating about cases. You can't communicate with the assessor or the appellant about their case. Don't do independent research. I mean, we know these neighborhoods, we know the community, we probably drive by the homes, but don't go out there and do your own independent research.
Emily, can I interject? This is Beth. Because they sit in panels of 3 or whatever our panels, a configuration is, can you address that aspect when you're talking about the numbers?
Sure, right. So that's true. Because you sit in panels of 3, actually, you can, you're really not supposed to be like getting together. Typically it's going to be 2, and then if you have the 3rd, you're going to tip into your majority or more. It's really 2.5 people, which is not a thing. So if 2 of you are at Fred Meyer and you've got a 3rd, somebody should walk away. So that's a really good point. There's a difference between you've got your big group and then your smaller groups. So just be careful. It goes back to the idea of, we want our community to have faith in what you're doing, transparency in government. Nobody's having side conversations. So thank you, Beth. That's a really good point. And then the final thing is, if you think that you have a conflict, I know that Di had mentioned that the list is sent out so you can look at it about conflicts ahead of time. But if something comes up and you don't realize who a person is until you get the packet, just call us right away. And we can make adjustments. We don't ever want to have you kind of be in a conflict situation. So that's the long and short of it. I mean, I think you've got for the new people, you've got a really amazing set of board members who've done this for many, many years. They're very good at this process. They'll help walk you through it. And honestly, after, one or two, you'll get the flow of it. I'm always, so that Mr. Coogan, not calling the assessor's office, that doesn't count for me. You guys can always email me if you have questions. You can always reach out to me. I'm your person. So I think that's it, but I'm happy to answer anything.
Yeah, I have two questions, and Ms. Wright, you just spoke right there at the end about it's always okay to call you, but what you would be talking to code issues or legal issues and not how the assessment was comprised or that sort of thing. That's the sole domain of the assessor, right?
That's right. I am purely talking about code and process.
Thank you. And the other thing is, in the past, I'm not sure we did it last year. I don't think so, but we had an alternate. Are we going to continue the process of last year and just have three people show up on hearing night?
I'll check the clerks on that.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. That was part of the change that happened and made it panels of 3 without the need for an alternate.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might just add to that, that's another key reason why, if you see that there is a conflict, that we know well in advance of the hearing date so that we can ensure that there are 3 panelists without conflict that are actually sitting and hearing those cases. And if I might just go back to kind of what Ms. Wright was saying, and this even goes back a little further to what Mr. Solomon Gross had mentioned, was any of those conversations, it's best to be on the record if you're having any discussion whatsoever about a particular appeal or an appeal process, whether that's asking the assessor questions at the time that you're doing the appeal hearings. And that goes to what Ms. Wright was saying. If you meet somebody in the grocery store or whatever, just don't talk about appeal matters or anything that's before the board, that there would be decision making taking place, because you as the board, you are Switzerland, you're the neutral territory, just like the clerks are the neutral territory. You are the ones to sit in that quasi judicial status, hearing both sides. The assessor is one of those sides. So by contacting the assessor's office outside of this forum is then could potentially be considered ex parte contact.
So the moral of the story for myself and Mr. Solomon Gross is when we meet at Fred Meyer on Saturday morning, we must limit our discussion to the price increases in ISO debts or nibs or things of that nature, which we will do, right, Mr. Solomon Gross?
Absolutely, Mr. Epstein.
Very, very well. Is there any more questions, comments on the BOE hearing process? Hearing none, we'll move to the next item of business, which is election of the BOE chair and vice chair.
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Epstein,
Chair, I
Mr.
believe
Coogan.
Mr. Cook.
Oh boy.
I'm sorry, Chairman. I couldn't get my functionality here. But the BOE hearing is it gonna, you think that'll be you think it'll be Zoom, or do you think it'll be live?
I think the process is when room 224 is available, it will be hybrid. When room 224 is not available, it will be 100% Zoom. Do I have that correct?
That is correct, Chair. Thank you. And after this meeting, I will once again send out the schedule that shows it's, the Thursdays. And then once we get the list of appellants, we'll be able to kind of finalize that a little bit better with any potential conflicts. But yes,
So as
it will be.
as a follow-up to that question,
Mhm.
is it conceivable that a person could be out of town traveling and do this via Zoom? You don't have to be in Juneau, right? Okay.
That is
thank you.
correct. Ideally, it would be nice. I'm working to have panels, the panel of 3 at least be in person. But life happens, so if you needed to be on Zoom, that's why we have that option, just as the assembly and all of our meetings are conducted now, for the most part.
So I can assume that most people, most board members will want to be in person if they, if they can, right? Okay, thank you.
That's a correct assumption. I know that they have been on Zoom since 2020, and we're looking forward to actually getting to finally meet and chat in person. So that was the goal for this year.
And I'm sorry, guys, I had my view. I should have had it on gallery so I can see everyone, and I missed some raised hands. So I've corrected that. Now that we're about ready to end the meeting, I think now we can move on to the election.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Solomon Gross.
It is with my great pleasure to nominate you to again be the chair of the BOE.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon Gross. Would you, Mr. Sonnenberg?
I will second that nomination.
Thank you, Mr. Sonnenberg. It's been moved and seconded that I be appointed chair of the Board of Equalization for this year. Are there any objections to this motion? I don't see any.
No objection.
Thank you. Now entertain.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, since we do have Mr. Durant only via audio, anytime you have audio only participants, we should take a voice vote
Okay.
on those who are voting in the affirmative and in the negative.
So do we want to backtrack here a little bit and have the clerk call the roll? Madam Clerk, would you please
That
call
would be
the roll?
advisable, yeah, and Di, I'll let you take on those since you're doing the notes on that one.
Thank you. I think. So in the nomination of Mr. Epstein as chair again, Mr. Sonnenberg, how do you vote? I'm sorry, actually, Mr. Solomon Gross, how do you vote?
Yes, for
Mr. Sonnenberg,
Yes,
Ms. Haynes,
Yes.
Mr. Coogan,
You're muted.
it looked like I heard you
That's a
say.
yes. It was a yes.
Yes, I saw your head motions. Thank you, Mr. Coogan. And I'm sorry, I'm going to once again butcher our other 2 newest members' names, but I will do my best. Mr. Salk.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mr. Durant.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now entertain nominations for vice chair of BOE for this year. Mr. Sonnenberg.
I would nominate Mr. Solomon Gross.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very well. Mr. Sonnenberg has moved and Ms. Haynes has seconded to elect Mr. Solomon Gross as Vice Chair of the Board of Equalization for this year. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. So the motion to elect Mr. Solomon Gross as the vice chair, Mr. Sonnenberg.
Get my mute off here. Yes.
That's okay. I can hear you from the other room. Ms. Haynes,
I vote yes.
Mr. Coogan,
Yes.
Mr. Solomon Gross. I see
Yeah.
your head nodding.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Durant. Mr. Ben Durant.
Yes.
Thank you. And who am I? Mr. Solid.
Yes.
Okay, I think Chair Epstein.
Yes, and if you wouldn't mind, I have to believe in myself. You didn't ask for my vote in the previous vote, so I'd like to vote yes for
realized
myself.
that. My supervisor's messing me up tonight. Motion passes.
Okay, well, congratulations, Mr. Solomon Gross.
You
Thank-
too. Congratulations, Mr.
Thank you. And I was remiss when we began tonight's meeting in not welcoming Mr. Durant, Mr. Salick, and Mr. Coogan. We're very glad to have you after a couple years of wandering in the desert without any new members. It's refreshing and comforting to have you three on the board. I appreciate your service, and I agree with Ms. Wright that once you attend a hearing or two, you'll get the swing of things and be able to fully participate. Our next item on the agenda is our next hearing date. Madam Clerk, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Chair. So right now, we have a placeholder for Thursday, May 9th would be, it really is dependent on the appellants and the assessor's office of when they're ready to move those forward. So keep a placeholder for May 9th. I guess I should actually say, as long as I have a captive audience, for that hearing, and all of them will be on Thursdays. I have David, Gary, and Emily. I'm happy to put one of the new members in. The other option is that for new members, these will also be on Zoom, so you're always welcome to sit in and listen to process. So just because you're not on a panel doesn't mean that you can't sit in attendee mode and listen in. Anyways, so mark your calendars for May 9th, 5:30. That one is actually, we have the ability to be in conference room 224 here at City Hall, as well as having Zoom as the other option. Ms. Hammond.
I'm sorry, we're not likely to have hearings on May 9th.
Okay.
Possibly the 23rd would be the first one that I would expect to see a hearing.
Perfect. That is great to know. Thank you. So for Thursday, the 23rd, that same thing would be a Zoom and also City Hall Conference Room 224. I had a tentative David, Gary, and then depending on who else was available. We have one member that isn't here tonight, so we have some time to figure that out, and I will send you an email with that information. But I guess mark your calendars for May 23rd.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. If I may ask, and you can refuse to answer, it was previously noted that there were 4 possible appeals. Are any of those, are there any late hearing appeals so far? If I can ask that.
I believe we have one late file.
Okay.
We
Very
would
well.
have moved those forward if we had more, but we only had one.
And we didn't talk about late filed appeals. So I just like to take a minute here, if I may, and talk about that. The assessor's office mails out the notices on a certain day, and everyone that receives a postcard has 30 days to submit an appeal. If they don't get it in by the end of that period, then their opportunity has gone by. They do have, if they can prove that they were unable to comply with that notification time frame, that's what is considered in a late file appeal. And really, to make a long story short, a person typically has to be in a incapacitated or perhaps incarcerated, a very extenuating circumstance that would convince the board that they were truly not able to comply. It doesn't count if you're on vacation and you just forgot that. That's not a valid excuse for missing the time frame to file an appeal. And if Ms. Wright would like to augment that, or Ms. Hammond, please feel free.
Sure, I'll just tell you the definition of that unable to comply is on that quick reference sheet. So if it comes up, pull that quick reference sheet up and you can see. But I agree with the chair on this kind of standard is very high.
But a question, follow-up question, please.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to translate it to mean it has to be a situation beyond the control of the appellant, right? That's what we're saying here. And I think that the incarceration one's an interesting, that's an interesting point you raised there. I mean, it would seem to me that would be a matter of choice, that someone gets incarcerated by choice, don't they?
I've heard it happen, but not often.
I mean, albeit it must be a poor choice, but it's a choice,
Yeah.
right? Anyway, very interesting stuff.
It is. With that, is there any
Mr.
more?
Chair, I have one question, just process-wise, timing-wise. In the last year's appeal process, the board had decided that it did not want to hear any more than 3 appeals per date. And I guess my question partly would be to Ms. Hammond with the timing of how these fall. If we're not really even starting until May 23rd, how many, I see in Mr. Morris's presentation, there were a total of 124 residential appeals and 34 commercial appeals this year. So we're not only going into election mode for a potential special election, but then regular elections. And so I just want to make sure I can staff my staff and to wear all the hats we have to wear. If you might be able to speak to what your caseload looks like for this appeal session.
When the presentation was being put together, we had, I think, 2 appeals for residential properties that wanted to go to the Board of Equalization, but after speaking to those owners, they changed their minds after they spoke to me. So at this point, I think we have a few commercial appeals, but Mr. Morris is going to be out in the time period that we would need to prepare for the hearings.
Thank you for that clarification.
But May 23rd is still the first date that it looks like we'll have some business to transact. Is that correct?
I believe so. We're
Okay,
working through the appeals. We have fairly new residential staff, but they're working through everything. Then it all has to come through either myself or Aaron Landbeck, and then well, if we have something, we'll certainly have it on the 23rd.
thank you, Ms. Hammond.
So let me ask something for the benefit of the newcomers. I'm hearing, we're talking about appeals. I heard it mentioned that we had 4 appeals already in place or something, but there are a whole bunch of, there's two, the hierarchy of things is you have appeals, then you have those that go to the board. Okay, so I'm guessing it sounds like you can't come up with a number how many go to the board, because you have to work through them first, and then that process has to more or less be unresolved in order for it to go to the board. So right now, all you can do is come up with a guess at how many there might be for this year, right? Is that a reasonable view that I have there?
Ms. Hammond, then Mr. Morris, I think. Go ahead.
I believe we typically have about 3% of all of the appeals go to the Board of Equalization. And I don't know if that's going to be the case this year, but we have to work through the appeals and determine with the property owner that they don't agree with us and they want to go to the board. So yes, it's a different levels of process.
So given that the historical number, 3% of what does that put you at? About maybe 5 total or something?
Yes, 4.74.
Yeah, right. Okay. So actually it's kind of a light year right now, right? For the board.
I expect it to be.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Mr. Morris, did you have a comment or a question? You're muted.
Mary covered it. Although I believe we are getting close to working through our appeals. So we're on the tail end of that, aren't we, Mary, for residential?
I think we're about halfway through for residential.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Is there any more business to come before the board this evening? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon Gross. The BOE meeting for this evening is adjourned at 6:59 p.m. Thank you all for attending. And again, welcome to the new members, and we'll see you most likely on May 23rd. Have a pleasant evening.